Can you still remember Charlie Harper's jokes and Alan's endless bad luck? They made us laugh for 12 years. But the cast's real lives took shocking turns. One was swallowed by a dangerous cult at just 10 years old. Another went from earning nearly $2 million an episode to scraping by on $300,000. Several beloved cast members are sadly no longer with us. This is the untold story behind 2.5 Men. Let's find out what really happened to them by 2026. Angus T. Jones. Jake Harper, the lazy, dim-witted teenager who did nothing but eat, sleep, and stumble through punchlines, was played Angus T. Jones at 10 years old before he even had a chance to understand what Hollywood actually was. In November 2012, a video surfaced online and sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. Angus, the kid earning $350,000 per episode, looked straight into the camera and said, "Please stop watching it. Please stop filling your head with filth." The media called it a breakdown, a betrayal, proof that a kid had been brainwashed by religion. However, there was a reason why actually happened to that boy during the 9 years before that video ever existed. Angus went through puberty in front of 15 million people every week. He was earning more money than most adults around him before he was old enough to understand what money meant. He won Young Artist Awards in 2004 and 2006, while most kids his age were just trying to get through middle school. And then one day the show ended, and nobody had prepared him for what life looked like when he was no longer Jake Harper. Right in the middle of that emptiness, a radical religious organization found him. They didn't come with doctrine. They came with something that felt like belonging, like someone actually listening. Then gradually they leveraged his fame and his money in ways a 19-year-old with no real guidance had no way of seeing coming. He left the show, disappeared. And Hollywood moved on almost immediately, as if those 9 years had never happened. By 2026, Angus T. Jones is 32. He lives almost completely off the grid. No marriage, no public presence, most of his old connections in the industry long since cut off. Cryptocurrency investments tied to financial networks now under federal scrutiny are pulling him into legal territory he never saw coming. Charlie Sheen. By 2010, Charlie Sheen was earning $1.8 million per episode. He is the highest-paid actor on television at that time. He was 38 when the show started in 2003, already carrying real credibility. Platoon in 1986, Wall Street in 1987, a Golden Globe for the latter. Then came Charlie Harper, a wealthy bachelor who drank too much, slept around, and never faced consequences for any of it. This role asked Sheen to stretch. In 2011, it all came apart in public. CBS fired him after a string of erratic statements aimed at the show's creator. He launched a live tour that same year called The Torpedo of Truth. Audiences came expecting a meltdown. He gave them one. Winning became the word everyone repeated that year, half as a joke, half as a diagnosis. Then, in November 2015, on national television, he told the world he'd been HIV positive since 2011. 4 years he'd spent managing it privately while tabloids wrote about everything else. Several former partners sued him in the years that followed, alleging he'd exposed them without disclosing his status. Sheen settled multiple of these cases out of court, including one payout reportedly around $10 million to a former girlfriend in 2018. By 2026, at 60, Sheen has been sober since 2017. The show still pays him. 2.5 Men runs in syndication somewhere on cable television every single day, 2 decades after it premiered, the same contract that made him one of the richest sitcom actors alive, while the rest of his life was coming apart. Conchata Ferrell. In 2003, Conchata Ferrell was 60 years old when she stepped onto the set of 2.5 Men to play Berta, the housekeeper. She'd stay there for 12 seasons. 2 Emmy nominations followed, in 2005 and 2007. But long before any of that, Ferrell had spent over a decade training in off-Broadway theater. She'd appeared in Edward Scissorhands in 1990, Erin Brockovich in 2000. She had range, real, trained, theatrical range. However, Hollywood looked at her differently. A heavy-set woman with an unconventional face gets cast a certain way, and once that casting starts, it rarely stops. Maids, housekeepers, the sharp-tongued background figure who exists to make someone else's scene work. Despite of these matters, Berta made her famous. By the time the show wrapped in 2015, her body had been failing for years. Obesity had worn through her joints. Her kidneys were giving out. And in America, chronic illness comes with a price tag that can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars, a weight that fell on her husband, Arnie Anderson, during the hardest years of her life. On October 12, 2020, Conchata Ferrell died of cardiac arrest. She was 77 years old. A two-time Emmy nominee with real theatrical training spent her last years fighting her own body and the bills that came with it. Jon Cryer, Alan Harper, the unemployed, penny-pinching older brother who got dumped by his wife and had to mooch off his younger sibling, was the role Jon Cryer played for 12 years and 262 episodes. He stepped into that character at 38 years old. There's a strange paradox that ran through all those years. Charlie Sheen was making $1.8 million per episode. Cryer worked twice as hard, appeared in more scenes, and took home significantly less. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was standing in front of a camera every week while tens of millions of people laughed at a man the entire show treated as a failure in every sense of the word. Then someone called, "Cut." He took off the mic, went home, and did the exact same thing again the following week, for 12 years straight. Psychologists have a term for what can happen in situations like that: character capture. When the line between the actor and the character slowly dissolves, not because of a lack of professionalism, but simply because they've done it too long, too consistently, too many times. The irony is that the role made him. Cryer walked away with 2 Emmy Awards for playing Alan Harper. The show turned him from the kid audiences remembered in Pretty in Pink back in 1986 into one of the most recognizable faces on American television. Then, the show ended. He stepped outside, and there was no script for what came next. By 2026, at 61, the alopecia he'd been quietly covering up with hair pieces on screen for years is no longer something he can hide. His adopted daughter is hitting adulthood with her own complicated psychological struggles, and his marriage to Lisa Joyner is carrying the weight of all of it at once. It's the kind of toll that doesn't make headlines, the slow, quiet cost of 12 years under the lights that the camera never bothered to capture. Holland Taylor. In 2003, Holland Taylor joined 2.5 Men at 60 years old to play Evelyn Harper, the controlling, sharp-tongued mother who terrorized her 2 grown sons every chance she got. She made the mother images unforgettable, but Hollywood has a well-known habit. Women over 50 get quietly phased out. So in 2013, at nearly 70, she did something the studios never asked for. She wrote a one-woman play called Anne, about Texas Governor Ann Richards, and funded it herself. She performed it on Broadway, carrying the entire 2-hour show alone, night after night. It earned her a Tony nomination in 2013. It also proved that the industry had badly underestimated her. By 2026, at 83, Taylor faces something no resume prepares you for: early signs of mild cognitive decline. Her relationship with Sarah Paulson, 32 years her junior and one of the more publicly visible age gap relationships in Hollywood, has held strong for over a decade. But 2026 has tested it. As Taylor's health shifts, Paulson has reportedly scaled back her own filming schedule to take on more of the caregiving herself. Ashton Kutcher. Ashton Kutcher was 33 years old when he replaced Charlie Sheen on 2.5 Men in 2011, playing Walden Schmidt, a heartbroken billionaire trying to rebuild his life. Before that role, he'd already made his name in That 70s Show and The Butterfly Effect in 2004. What most people didn't know was what came before any of that. Kutcher has a twin brother, Michael, born with cerebral palsy. As a child, Michael needed a heart transplant to survive. Ashton has spoken publicly about growing up with the guilt of being the healthy twin. That guilt followed him into adulthood. It's part of why he became one of the most aggressive tech investors in Hollywood, backing Uber and Airbnb at early stages, building a net worth that reportedly reached hundreds of millions of dollars. Friends close to him have said the money was never really about the money. In 2011, Kutcher was diagnosed with vasculitis, an autoimmune condition that attacked his blood vessels and temporarily cost him his vision and hearing. He's spoken about that period as one of the scariest of his life. By 2026, at 48, the worst of it has passed, but the migraines haven't. He still deals with severe episodes tied to the lasting effects of the illness. His marriage to Mila Kunis, together since 2012 and married since 2015, is reportedly under real strain this year. The ongoing fallout from his and Kunis's character letters supporting their longtime friend Danny Masterson, written during Masterson's 2023 sexual assault trial, keeps resurfacing publicly, and keeps testing a marriage that had largely stayed out of the headlines. Marin Hinkle, Judith Harper was never meant to be likable. Alan's cold, controlling ex-wife written to be despised from her very first scene. That was the role Marin Hinkle stepped into at 37 years old. In 2003. The writers did their job too well. Viewers couldn't tell where the character ended and the actress began, because Hinkle has spoken about the wave of real-world hostility that followed her for years. Strangers attacking her online, treating her like she'd actually wronged someone, simply because she'd played the part convincingly. Over time, she pulled back from public life almost entirely, developing a form of agoraphobia that kept her away from crowds for years. She eventually found a very different kind of role. Her work in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel earned her 3 consecutive Emmy nominations for Outstanding Supporting Actress, from 2018 to 2020, a complete reversal of the character that had once made her a target. Then, in March 2024, came a different kind of loss. After 25 years of marriage to attorney Michael Rauch, Hinkle finalized her divorce. By 2026, at 60, she's in intensive therapy, working through the isolation and sense of failure that followed the split. Chronic insomnia, which surfaced after the divorce, continues to affect her physical health 2 years later. Melanie Lynskey. At 26 years old, Melanie Lynskey signed on in 2003 to play Rose, the lovable, slightly unhinged neighbor obsessed with Charlie Harper, the kind of character built entirely for laughs. What audiences saw as comic timing was, off-camera, something much harder. Lynskey has spoken about living with misophonia, a disorder where certain everyday sounds, chewing, breathing, small background noise, can trigger genuine panic. Combined with a binge-eating disorder she battled privately during those years, filming a multi-camera comedy in front of a live studio audience became something closer to an ordeal than a job. However, she'd proven her range when she starred opposite Kate Winslet in Heavenly Creatures in 1994. By 2026, at 49, Lynskey has built one of the most respected careers of anyone from the original cast, anchoring Yellow Jackets and appearing in The Last of Us. But the industry hasn't let up. She's spoken candidly about facing renewed body shaming over postpartum weight gain, and about having to repeatedly push back against producers who wanted her to alter her natural body for roles. Courtney Thorne-Smith, Lindsay McElroy, Alan's on-and-off love interest, was the role that brought Courtney Thorne-Smith onto the show in 2010, at 42 years old. It wasn't her first time carrying that kind of pressure. Through Melrose Place and Ally McBeal in the 1990s, she'd already been one of the defining faces of that decade's television, the kind of it-girl status networks build entire shows around. By the time she reached According to Jim in the 2000s, the pressure had changed shape, but not intensity. What's less talked about is what it cost her to stay in that position. Thorne-Smith has spoken about the relentless industry pressure on actresses to undergo cosmetic procedures just to keep working past a certain age. Rather than comply with it indefinitely, she chose to step back from leading roles altogether. By 2026, at 58, she's almost entirely out of the spotlight. Her marriage to Roger Fishman, since 2004, has held steady, built partly, she's said, on a shared decision to stay away from the industry's pace. These days, she writes fiction under a pen name and manages mild chronic arthritis in her knees, living quietly outside the city instead of chasing another comeback. Jennifer Taylor. At 31, Jennifer Taylor was close to packing up and leaving Los Angeles for good when she landed the recurring role of Chelsea in 2003, broke and nearly out of options. The part kept her afloat financially. It also became the only thing casting directors could see her as. For years afterward, every audition carried the same shadow, producers remembering her as Charlie Sheen's almost girlfriend, rather than evaluating her on her own merits. A typecasting problem common to actresses who land one high-visibility role tied to a bigger star. Before 2.5 Men, her most notable credit had been Wild Things in 1998. By 2026, at 54, her marriage to Paul Taylor, intact since 1997, has remained her steadiest anchor through the industry's long silence. Unable to find consistent work at major networks, she's shifted unexpectedly into producing low-budget independent films centered on family and faith themes. She's also been managing severe perimenopause symptoms largely on her own, something she said has affected both her focus and her mental health while trying to build this second act. Ryan Stiles. At 45, Ryan Stiles joined the cast in 2004 as Herb Melnick, Judith's second husband, a role that leaned heavily on his trademark physical comedy. Standing nearly 6'6", that height was always his signature. It was also, quietly, his biggest liability. Decades of physical comedy, first honed on Whose Line Is It Anyway, and The Drew Carey Show had taken a real toll on a frame that size. Stiles dealt with degenerative spine issues and chronic back pain for years, the kind that doesn't show up on camera but doesn't go away between takes either. Every stumble that made an audience laugh was, underneath it, a body-absorbing real damage. By 2026, at 67, his marriage to Patricia McDonald, going on nearly 40 years, remains the steadiest part of his life. The joint and spine issues have finally caught up with him enough that he's stopped touring with live improv shows entirely this year, stepping back to run the Upfront Theater in Washington State instead, managing the business side while his body recovers. Amber Tamblyn. By the time Amber Tamblyn joined the show at 30 in 2013 to play Jenny Harper, Charlie's estranged daughter, she'd already spent over a decade trying to separate herself from where she came from. She's the daughter of actor Russ Tamblyn, raised inside a Hollywood family with deep roots in the industry. That inheritance came with its own kind of pressure. Tamblyn has talked about consistently choosing roles that pushed against expectations, rebellious characters, queer characters, psychologically complex ones, partly as a way of proving she could build a career on her own terms. Her work in Joan of Arcadia earned her both an Emmy nomination and a Golden Globe nomination, and she later starred in The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants franchise. By 2026, at 43 years old, she married to David Cross and largely steps away from acting to focus on writing and activism. She was one of the visible figures during the Time's Up movement's legal battles in the years that followed, work that came at a real personal cost. She's spoken openly about burnout and a long-running struggle with social anxiety that intensified during that period. Sophie Winkleman Zoe, Walden's quirky love interest, was the role Sophie Winkleman took on in 2011 at 31, an odd fit for someone whose life had already changed in a much bigger way. By then, she'd already become Lady Frederick Windsor, having married into the British royal family. Of course, the two worlds didn't mix easily. British aristocracy looked at her sideways for doing American sitcom comedy. Hollywood, meanwhile, kept its distance because of the royal title. Winkleman spent years caught between two institutions that each viewed her through the lens of the other, never quite fully accepted by either. Her earlier work on the British series Peep Show had established her as a serious comedic actress. In 2017, she survived a serious car accident that fractured her back. By 2026, at 45 years old, she's recovered through spinal surgery involving metal implants, though weather changes still trigger sharp pain. She returned to film work with a role in Wonka in 2023, but stays highly selective about what she takes on, careful to protect the royal image that now follows her into every casting decision. April Bowlby. In 2005, at 25, April Bowlby stepped into the role that would define her for the next decade. Candy, Charlie's ditzy on-and-off girlfriend. The role made her instantly recognizable. It also nearly ended her career. For roughly a decade afterward, casting directors could only see her one way: pretty, blonde, and not particularly bright, regardless of what she actually brought to an audition. Bowlby has spoken about the toll that narrow typecasting took on her, including periods of depression tied to feeling boxed out of more substantive work by an industry that had already decided what she was for. She eventually broke through in a different direction, playing Elasti-Woman in Doom Patrol and starring in Drop Dead Diva. By 2026, at 45 years old, she's navigating a different kind of challenge. She had her first child in 2022 at 42, and the postpartum recovery has stretched on for years. Chronic fatigue and prolonged postpartum hair loss that's lasted well into 2026. Married to Jeremy Renton, she's stepped back from roles that demand a certain look entirely, shifting instead toward hosting a family-focused podcast. Graham Patrick Martin Eldridge McElroy, Lindsay's dim-witted, perpetually awkward teenage son, was the role Graham Patrick Martin stepped into in 2010 at just 18 years old. It was a small part, but it would follow him for years. Child and teen actors carry a particular fear once they age out of a long-running show, getting frozen in audiences' minds at the exact age they left it, forever the kid from that one sitcom. So Martin moved fast. He pivoted hard into heavier, psychologically demanding territory, landing recurring roles on The Closer and Major Crimes, eventually earning a SAG Award nomination for his work. It wasn't a natural next step. It was a calculated escape. It worked, in the sense that he disappeared from public view almost entirely. By 2026, at 34, Martin lives a deliberately private life in Los Angeles. Unmarried, rarely seen, rarely heard from. The career hasn't gotten easier either. He's been self-funding short films as a director, none of which have turned a profit. And alongside that, he's taken on something far removed from acting altogether, running a non-profit that supports homeless youth, work that's put him face-to-face with a side of struggle no sitcom ever prepared him for. Jane Lynch. Dr. Linda Freeman, the sharp, unflinching therapist who saw straight through Charlie Harper's chaos and never let him off the hook, was the role Jane Lynch took on in 2004 at 44. The irony of it ran deeper than anyone watching could have known. While playing a clinical psychologist who diagnosed other people's dysfunction with cool precision, Lynch was privately deep into her own years-long battle with serious alcohol addiction. She's since spoken openly about it. Walking onto set to play someone who had it all figured out, while quietly attending AA meetings to hold her own life together, was, in her words, an emotionally wrenching thing to do. She got sober eventually, and the career that followed became one of the most decorated of anyone in this cast. Her turn as Sue Sylvester in Glee won her an Emmy and a Golden Globe, transforming her from a recognizable character actress into one of television's most distinctive comedic forces. She went on to host Hollywood Game Night, becoming a fixture of American television in a completely different register than Dr. Freeman ever allowed. But the past 2 decades haven't been without their own quieter struggles. By 2026, At 66, Lynch is dealing with worsening sudden hearing loss in one ear, a condition that started to affect her sense of direction on stage, where sound cues matter more than most people realize. Her personal life has steadied considerably since then. After her first marriage ended in 2014, she remarried in 2021 to Jennifer Chaney. That relationship has become her main anchor through what she's described as serious burnout after decades of working at Hollywood's relentless pace. Emmanuelle Vaugier. She brought Charlie Harper to his knees, literally, with a proposal, playing Mia, the no-nonsense pole dancing instructor, starting in 2005 at 29. It made her instantly memorable. It also boxed her in almost immediately. Vaugier's combination of sharp looks and physical confidence became, in industry terms, a ratings draw, and the roles that followed leaned hard into exactly that. She found herself repeatedly cast as the seductive villain or the eye candy in low-budget thrillers, the kind of typecasting actresses call genre jail, where one successful look becomes the only thing anyone will hire you for. She did manage to build a real lasting career inside those constraints. She played Detective Jessica Angel on CSI, NY, took on Addison Corday across 2 installments of the Saw franchise, and later starred as Ebony in the fantasy series Lost Girl. The physical cost of all those years caught up with her eventually. By 2026, at 50, Vaugier is managing fibromyalgia, a chronic condition causing widespread muscle pain, fatigue, and serious sleep disruption. She's chosen to stay single and has stepped largely away from Los Angeles, spending most of her time now running a wildlife conservation charity she founded herself. So that's a look back at the 2.5 Men cast, then versus now in 2026. Over the years, some found even greater success. Others faced heartbreaking losses, health battles, and unexpected life changes that no one saw coming. Which cast member surprised you the most, and who was your favorite character on the show? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more Then versus Now updates.